Hi, everybody. This is Horsepower Heritage. I'm Maurice Merrick. Thanks for joining me once again. And today my guest is Juan Diego Calle, founder and CEO of Classic.com. Now, we all surf the web for interesting cars, right? So you've probably already been on Classic.com. But if you haven't, just know it's a great resource whether you're buying, selling, or just looking around at cars for fun, which I do all the time, of course. Juan and I talked about a variety of his business ventures over the years, from his early work in cyberspace to restoring Toyota FJ40s and Porsche 911s. And I really admire entrepreneurs who take an idea and just build something cool, you know? And he had some great insights into all of it. Now, before we get going, don't forget, follow Horsepower Heritage on Instagram and YouTube. Share this podcast episode with a friend who might enjoy it. And finally, become a patron of the show. Just go to buymeacoffee.com/HP Heritage. There's a link in the show notes, and you can make it a one-time gift or a recurring gift. Let's say, for example, $1 an episode. That's just $24 for the year. Not a lot of money, but it helps me continue to bring you the stories you enjoy. And thank you to those of you who've already become patrons. Much appreciated. All right, here's my conversation with Juan Diego Calle of Classic.com. Enjoy. Juan, thanks for doing this. This is going to be fun. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
You are diversified, my friend. The FJ company, which is classic and custom Toyota Land Cruisers, STRAAT, which is classic and custom Porsche 911s, and it looks like all air-cooled cars, although you do both long hoods and impact bumper cars.
Yeah.
But also Classic.com, which is kind of the big boy on the block in terms of your business. But I got to start when you were a kid. Tell me about road trips in your grandfather's FJ40 in Colombia. I have this picture in my mind of you guys like bouncing down a jungle track, right? Is that at all accurate?
It's not far from the truth, actually. It's very interesting. I'm glad you started there because that is the genesis of our entire career in cars. Was riding in my grandfather's FJ40. So he had, and we always tell the story, he had two cars during his lifetime: a 1968 FJ40, light blue. Then he sold that and bought a 1982 FJ40, medium blue, so a little bit of a darker blue. And so that's where we grew up driving. Curiously enough, he wasn't the one doing the driving. It was my grandmother.
Oh, really?
He never drove. He was never found behind the wheel for whatever reason. He just never drove. But it was his car. Like, we always knew it as his car. I didn't get to experience a 68. I was on the 82 most growing up. And yeah, it was, my parents were big into ranches and that sort of thing and traveling the country. That car went all the way from Colombia all to Ecuador and back several times. And at the time, being in the back of an MJ40 bouncing around literally was normal. It's not like we knew something different. So, but now looking back, long story short, I kept that car. We restored it when he passed away. I drive it today with my kids and I see how they bounce around in the back from side to side. And I can't believe we experienced that over, tens of thousands of miles or kilometers, actually. So,
did he by any chance have nicknames for those FJs?
He did not. Zero. There was zero affinity to, it was a purely
a tool,
a utility. Right. And it was about reliability. It was about making sure that the car wouldn't break down, wouldn't get stuck. Right. And that we could load it up with all our groceries for the farm for the weekend and whatever equipment the farm needed. We would all load all that stuff up. And it was a utility. I think he would probably laugh at us for assigning so much value to that car today.
Yeah. Well, I mean, after all, we've romanticized vehicles in general.
Absolutely.
We remember them being better than they actually were in a lot of cases.
For sure.
And even I think people who've had and this is true of myself, even bad experiences with cars, the time that passes seems to sort of blunt the trauma that you suffer at the time.
Yeah. Yep.
So I could tell you stories for hours about how cars have let me down or put me in a bad spot. And now I can laugh about it, of course. So I think that's a universal thing with car people. We're very forgiving in that way.
100%.
So a farm in rural Colombia is what I'm picturing, where your grandparents lived. But you actually grew up in Bogota early in your life?
I did.
Yeah.
I did. I grew up in Bogota. They lived in Bogota as well, but their weekends were always spent in a farm. So we would travel with them quite a bit.
Was it a working farm, by the way?
Yeah, working farms, 100%. Agriculture, cattle, that sort of thing.
Yeah. What a great place when you're a kid, just running around in a pasture and chasing
Incredible.
animals.
Yeah, incredible. Yes.
But now Bogota, no one will fail to recall that Bogota in the 90s was a violent and dangerous place.
Yeah, very, very unfortunate. So even earlier than that, right? The late 80s were extremely tough in Colombia. That's when my family decided to move. So I moved to the U.S. The first time I moved, it was 88. We moved back to Colombia and then back again to the U.S. in 1990. So I was 12 years old essentially when I landed in this country. But essentially, we left the country because of the security situation. You know, at that time it was mainly the narcos against the government. Today it's more the guerrillas against the government. So a little bit of a different context back then. But yeah, very, very dangerous. It must have felt a little bit like Beirut feels today, Lebanon, right? A bit of a failed state. That's how it was back then in Colombia.
Yeah. Scary. And even, being a kid, I can't imagine you're not really, you know, something's desperately wrong, but you don't really know all the moving parts of such. I mean, this is an adult world, right?
Yeah. But what's even crazier is you know that something is wrong, but it also becomes part of the landscape.
Right.
Because we didn't know any different.
So it's normalized.
It starts getting normalized. At the time there were bombs around the city, and you would hear the bombs, or you would be going down the road, the highway, and there would be a shooting might have occurred minutes earlier, and that becomes part of your landscape. So it's really amazing, especially when you don't have the contrast. When we arrived in the U.S., for me it was like being in paradise. And it still is.
Oh yeah. Well, and you guys went to Miami, right?
Yeah, we left to Miami. Yeah.
So Miami in the 90s, wow. I mean, the epicenter of supercars.
Yeah.
And I imagine you saw a lot of incredible machines.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It was super fun. But interestingly, that arriving there, you start getting the nostalgia of what we left behind.
Sure.
And, fast forward 10 years or so, and we start getting into cars and so on. And that's how the FJ for my grandfather ended up in Miami.
Okay, gotcha. Well, I mean, at least you brought that piece of home with you.
Yes, absolutely.
That's good. Juan, do you think those times in the FJ were formative in terms of you being interested in cars?
Absolutely. I think I learned how to drive in that vehicle.
Oh,
right?
Okay.
So that the process of learning how to drive, I think I would imagine that anybody who appreciates cars remembers what car they learned to drive on.
Sure.
Or in. It's certainly one of the best memories I have is learning to drive in that vehicle, and my kids today are learning how to drive in that vehicle, which is awesome.
Oh, good. Yeah. Well, and that has to take you back too.
Yeah. 100%.
Very cool. Now, obviously, lots of opportunities for you in the U.S. Was tech an early interest, or did you just kind of accidentally become a tech guy?
I definitely was interested early on in engineering in general, right? So I was very focused around anything to do with math, anything to do with engineering, anything to do with even design architecture to some extent. And that's what got me into mechanical engineering at school. While still in high school, I started building car stereo systems for my friends and family. Turned it into my first little business. And the work I did around that is what helped me get into college with in industrial and mechanical engineering at first. Then I switched over to industrial engineering, and that there is late 90s, right when we're in the middle of the internet bubble. and that's how I got into tech. Yeah.
I remember that bubble very well. Like
Who
nobody,
doesn't?
yeah, right. Especially if you were in it financially in any way. I wasn't, but I just remember no one really knew how to exploit the internet for profit yet. There was no business model to follow, and people didn't trust the internet yet in terms of financial transactions.
Absolutely.
And I remember even in the early 2000s selling a car on eBay and thinking, wow, this is kind of risky. And of course it wasn't, but I didn't innately trust the system yet.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. On the flip side, I feel so I'm very fortunate that I was in that period going to school while the internet was kind of having its moment, right? Its initial moment, I should say. One of the projects that I worked on in industrial engineering was to figure out a way for companies to answer questions for their employees. And so we built a search engine around that, and that ended up becoming my first startup, which was called Te Respondo, or I'll Answer You. It was focused around Latin America. So we built a search engine for Latin America. I ended up living in Brazil for a year, developing that business. And we were very fortunate that we were able to, we sold it, and fast forward to 2004 to Yahoo. So that was my introduction to tech, first thing in my career that we did really well.
So Te Respondo would be it's like a Latin American version of Jeeves.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I would think that the Latin American market might be even less trustworthy of internet and website at that point, in comparison to the US. Do you think that was true, or did people embrace it?
So yeah, I think everybody embraced it very, very quickly, but to your point, it felt a little bit like maybe like Bitcoin does to some today, right? There's a lack of trust, a lack of understanding, but the adoption curve is very, very fast.
Yeah.
Right? So that happened both in the US, and it certainly happened very, very quickly in Latin America as well.
Very cool.
Yeah.
By the way, you're a serial entrepreneur, and we hear that term a lot these days, but I don't know that there's any other kind. I mean, all of the entrepreneurs that I know, they're diversified. They've always got a new idea that they're chasing. So I don't know that there's any other kind of an entrepreneur but a serial one. What do you think?
I agreed 100%. It's it's almost like a disease. Your brain doesn't stop.
Right. And you're probably an ADHD guy too. I might have a twinge of it. I don't know if you do, but
definitely a little bit of ADHD. Yeah.
Yeah. Which,
sure.
If you know how to harness it, is a good thing.
Yeah, of course. And you have to surround yourself with people that are comfortable in that context. I think I'm sure that my team members they sometimes have a hard time dealing with all the all the things spewing out of my brain. So,
right.
But yes, it is. It can be harnessed, and it has a little bit to do with paranoia as well, right? Being paranoid.
You mean paranoid of failure, or
no, paranoid of competition.
Oh,
paranoid
yes.
of what's the next thing,
right?
That keeps me up at night quite a bit. Is okay, what's going to happen next,
and trying to anticipate changes and market trends, and
exactly,
the iceberg around the corner.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's interesting. Another one of your tech ventures that I was fascinated with when I read about it was that you launched the .co domain in Colombia. That's huge. I mean,
yeah. So to clarify that one, so we launched .co, and I would say more importantly, we launched it globally for a global audience.
Right.
So .co was a country code assigned to the country of Colombia for use as a Colombian resource. But of course, we saw the potential of .co being used as the acronym for company, right?
Right.
Shorter version of com. And so we launched it for global use, and that grew very, very quickly. And that was back in 2010. We got some big companies like Twitter and Amazon to use it for shorter URLs in certain social media and other venues. And then we sold that company in 2014.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's a big deal because the domain name, in a way, it's critical to a lot of businesses. They don't want just any domain.
Absolutely. And that's a lot of how we focus the marketing, right?
Yeah.
At the time, a lot of companies had taken up the entire .com space.
Right.
So we launched .co as an alternative that was shorter with more availability, very powerful tech behind it, very trustworthy. And that allowed us to grow the business very, very quickly.
Did you see people trying to scoop up different URLs to resell? Did that happen like it did with .com?
So because we had seen what had happened with .com and other domain extensions, we were able to put in a bunch of safeguards to protect trademark owners, right? So when .com was created, nobody was thinking about domain squatting, right?
Right. That's what it's called. Yeah,
exactly. Fast forward to 2010, we can see what was out there and sort of build safeguards against it. So we did. And the reality is that the space, the .co space, is a very safe space because there are safeguards to protect trademark owners. So if you have a valid trademark on something, you can get your .co very easily. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, this is fascinating stuff because we don't really think about it that much anymore, but building the internet that we have today, where we can have a site like classic.com, it was a lot of work and there was a lot of pitfalls along the way.
Yeah.
When did the FJ company come into being?
So Pass.co put a little bit of money in my pocket. My brother did too. And we've always done things together. We've always worked on a bunch of adventures together.
Your brother Nelson.
My brother Nelson, yeah. So at that point we decided, okay, let's invest in cars. We've always been passionate about cars. We've been racing cars, this and that. Let's invest in cars as an asset class.
Okay.
And we started doing that. But we started also buying Toyotas just because we love Toyotas, right? Because of our background with Toyotas. I brought the FJ to Miami, my grandfather's FJ to Miami, and it was an instant hit. It was like, oh my gosh, where did you get that? How can I get one? So, my brother and I got together and said, why don't we restore an FJ, bring it over to the US, and we'll sell it at auction. And so we did that. We did that with I think it was a green FJ40. We sent it to Dallas to be sold in Mecum, Dallas, and it was a huge hit. So we're like, all right, let's do another one, and that's how the FJ company was started. Essentially, building the cars in Colombia, shipping them over to the US, and selling them across the country through auctions mainly. Eventually, we built our own website. You could even spec out the car on the website. And that was the birth of the FJ company.
Right. So there's kind of two tracks that a customer can go down at the FJ company. One would be sort of a period correct build versus like a resto mod.
Yeah. So when the business first started, I would even say our customer base and we were very, very much purists. We liked to do things very much period correct. That evolved very, very fast. Yeah. Even with my car, right? When my car first arrived, it didn't have air conditioning and I was in Miami without air conditioning. I can't do this. Let's put air conditioning in. Then you start getting onto the highway and you realize, well, I might need to upgrade the suspension. And then you start going a little bit faster on the highway. So you need to upgrade the steering, the power steering box. And then all of a sudden you've got a Frankenstein.
Right.
Right. And the same thing happened with the company. The company started with very much period correct restorations. We would sell them through auction. Now all of a sudden we would get a call from somebody, say, hey, I love what you're doing. I love that you're keeping it classic, but I need air conditioning. Or I need this, or I need that, or the wife needs a USB plug for the cell phone, right? And very, very quickly that evolved into you need a brand new powertrain with front coil suspension, rear coil,
disc brakes,
superchargers, disc brakes, and so on. So today, what the core product that we offer at the FJ company is truly a fully re-engineered car. It's completely re-engineered. Even the body panels are using materials that are far more modern, more advanced. Obviously, the suspension brake, it's a car with traction control, ABS brakes,
Wow.
It's it truly is a re-engineered machine, but it looks very authentic. It looks very much like an FJ from that period. People that know obviously will see it and recognize that. Okay, wow, look at these little touches here. Look at that, and they'll realize that it's something unique.
No, it's true. I was looking at your builds on the website, and outwardly it looks totally stock, which is great because, if you know what you're looking at, oftentimes on these builds, it's a dead giveaway that it's been resto-modded. A good example would be if the wheels and tires are not in the right place in the wheel well, if they're moved forward or back a little bit, or the stance, the ride height, all of that is so it's not easy to get that stuff right with a resto mod.
It's very difficult. It's very difficult, and we do want to give the cars our own unique feel and look.
Sure.
But you want to preserve the essence of the car, what it was. Right. I'll give you one example of challenges around that. While we put a supercharged engine, brand new V6 into one of our cars, if a customer will ask us to do powered windows, we won't do that.
Right.
because you are removing the essence of what it feels like to be in one of these vehicles. You want to crank the window, right?
Yeah.
You want to hear a Toyota engine. That's important to us.
You use the GR V6 family of engines? Yeah, which is dead reliable.
Correct.
Yeah.
And it sounds like a Toyota. It feels like a Toyota.
One of the characteristic things about Toyotas, the starter motor. When that starter motor cranks, it's a Toyota.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You know what I mean? I like that.
Absolutely.
But this gets back to what I was saying earlier about how we all have kind of romanticized the original experience back in the day. Maybe when you first drove an old car, it doesn't live up to it all the time nowadays. And so people want modern convenience and safety, of course. So no, it's great. And there's such a tremendous market. It doesn't have to be a Toyota. It could be Nissan Zs.
Absolutely.
Old BMWs that get modern engine and drivetrain swaps, things like that. So
yeah.
Resto mods are cool. I love them. And you do the same thing at STRAAT, right? But just with Porsches.
We do the same thing with Porsches. Far less volume, so those are very, very, very high end custom builds. But it's a very similar concept. But I will say that from like a marketing perspective, we've very much differentiated the FJ company within our competitive arena. With Porsches, we do far more conventional build, but very, very high end.
You try to do all Toyota components and all Porsche components on these builds, right? Whenever possible. Obviously, there's a lot of good aftermarket stuff out there, things like brakes and power steering units and everything. But
yes, absolutely.
And Nelson kind of runs the show he's like your main man at both FJ Company and STRAAT, right?
Yeah, he is the main man in the restoration businesses. That's something that he's incredibly passionate about, what we do there. He also brings the racing background. I did a little go-kart racing in my past, but not anything to the extent that he did. He's been racing throughout his whole career. And actually the racing experience is huge for us when it comes to tuning cars.
Right.
Both the FJs and the Porsches, right? Every car goes to the track. It gets tracked, and certain tests or certain procedural tests that we do to each one, and a lot of that comes from his background in racing.
He vintage races these 911s, doesn't he?
He does.
So cool.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah.
By the way, what track do you guys use for your testing?
The one in Colombia,
okay,
in Bogota, first, and then in the US, there's one in Miami called the Concourse Club.
Sure,
where our cars go to be tested.
Yeah, I had Aaron Weiss on the show not long ago.
There you go.
Great guy.
Yeah.
I got to get down there. I have an open invitation, so maybe I'll see you down there.
It's remarkable what they have accomplished.
Yeah. Well, I think you have the perfect two-car solution here, Juan. An FJ and a 911.
Yes.
It's hard to beat that for the two-car solution.
I have a hard time in the morning before I go to drop off my kids to school when I have to pick what car to take them in.
That's the kind of problem I would love to have. I actually do the same thing, though. Juan, I do the school run in an old car every day that I can, unless it's, raining cats and dogs or something. But today we did it in the 31 Model A Roadster.
Yes.
So super fun. It's a jalopy. It's not restored. It's not, but it is a pretty original car.
Yeah. So I've got the FJ40 to choose from, and I've got a 993 C4S, which is the most fantastic Porsche that anybody could drive.
Why?
Maybe nostalgia. We had one in period, but it's such a great car. You really feel every aspect of the road, the mechanical workings of the car.
Yeah.
It's a really tough choice in the morning. I usually leave it up to my kids. I usually ask them, "Hey guys, which one do you want?" And they have a hard time with it.
What usually wins out? Is there a clear favorite, or is it?
If we have a lot of gear to take to the school, we usually end up in the FJ.
Yeah.
For the obvious reasons. The C4S is a 4-seater, but still a small car.
How old are your kids?
I've got 14, 12, 8, and 4.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you've got some of the age where they're definitely, you're doing the sports thing now.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Absolutely. My son does soccer, so I take him to soccer practice in town nearby. That's an awesome drive.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I bet. Because you're up in the mountains.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. 993. The other cool thing about it, of course, is the last of the air-cooled cars, exactly. Right? So yeah. So through all of this, Juan, you had to have learned quite a few lessons on the tech side and also on the automotive side. What were some of these lessons? I know that's a big question, by the way.
So very, very tough challenge. It actually takes us a little bit to the history of how Classic.com was born. So through the FJ company, I learned a lot about the industry. Right, we were sourcing cars all over the place, and quite frankly, all over the world. Right, we were sourcing cars for restoration in the Middle East. We were sourcing cars in the U.S. We were sourcing cars in Latin America. And when I say sourcing, I'm referring to the donor vehicles that we then use for the restoration process.
Right.
So in doing that, I learned a lot about, how to find these vehicles, how to price them. And I quickly realized that what I was experiencing was a problem that anyone interested in this market, anyone interested in a classic car would probably have, right? The problem of being able to source the vehicle, discover it anywhere in the world, then price it. And the third piece, how to buy it or how to sell it. Right? Mm. So if you look at Classic.com today, those are the three things that we're very, very focused on, is helping users discover cars, helping users price cars. And now, phase 3 of the project is let's help users sell cars very, very effectively. Now, there's the access to the information, number one. So how do we grab information from all these different sources? That's a big part of the challenges that we try to solve for. And then compiling all this data around pricing to make it actionable, right? So we saw that from the FJ company, and now we're applying that same principles or those same solutions to a much broader, much larger opportunity, which is every single make and model on the planet, essentially, right?
It's true, because I look at the site all the time, and there's some very obscure stuff on there.
Yes.
And I've heard you characterize Classic as the Zillow for classic cars. And I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, look, I think the Zillow parallel is very relevant. It struck me as odd that back in 5 years ago when we started the company, you couldn't go to a website like Zillow, type in the neighborhood that you were interested in, or type in the home and see all this information about a certain neighborhood, or see all this information about a certain car. it struck me as interesting that that did not exist for our industry. So given that we were having these problems sourcing cars, pricing cars, and so on in the FJ company, we said, oh, wait, light bulb moment, the paranoia and the
There it is.
entrepreneurial thing kicks in. And fast forward, and you've got a very large search engine that essentially aggregates listings from hundreds of sources, auctions, dealers, private sellers, makes that all very easy to consume. And then you've got a very powerful pricing algorithm similar to what Zillow does with real estate. And that's that's the core of what Classic is being able to go into the site, discover cars in very specific make and model combinations, and see the pricing in real time for those make and models.
Yeah. By the way, I'll tell you how I used to do this, and you may have too. I used to use Search Tempest, and I used to search a wide swath of Craigslist. There's another one called All of Craigslist, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And I was doing this to find cars, right? The problem is that you get separating the wheat from the chaff was just so laborious. Now, when I learned about classic.com, it just kind of like appeared in front of me. I think your search engine optimization must be outstanding, because I never saw anything about you launching the website. I never saw any blurbs on any automotive blogs or digital media. Suddenly classic.com was just there, and I was pretty instantly hooked because I love the valuation history and the graphs, the data that you guys have compiled. It's really useful. And most of the time I'm doing it just for fun, right? Because I've got enough cars. I don't need to buy anything else right now. I'd be in big trouble if I did. But so I got to hand it to you. Congratulations on a well-built website.
Thank you. I appreciate that, but I think it's purely about solving some real pain points.
Absolutely.
We've solved some pain points, or we're in the process of solving pain points. It's never ending, right? But again, going back to the core principles of the site is discovering, pricing, and helping yourselves. On the discovery front, on the pricing front, there's nothing like it. Quite simply, right? The number of sources that we track listings for is huge. The detailed pricing around specific makes and models it's very, very precise. And so I think that value prop is what allowed us to gain a lot of prominence in search engines. So to your point, search for very specific things, and you're going to probably find a website or a page to classic.com.
For those listeners who haven't really seen the website or don't know how it works, maybe they have an idea in their head of, some of the auction websites that are out there or whatever. I think you've told us sort of how Classic is different in that it's an aggregator, but how does it work for like a dealer or for a private party like me that wants to sell on Classic? How does that whole process work?
Yeah. So the site it combines two types of listings. And actually, this is something that initially for anyone coming to the site, the first time you see it, it's kind of hard to understand this part, which is you see everything that is for sale and you see everything that has sold.
Right.
The historical listings are incredibly important to the user experience because they give context to the for sale listings in a sense, right? From a pricing perspective and so on. So comparables are probably the biggest feature on the site. Is you go to a specific listing and then you can see all the comps for it. Again, both cars that are for sale and cars that may have sold or that might have gone through auction or whatever the case may be. So if you're a seller, whether you're a dealer on auction or a private party, being listed within that information is incredibly important. We like to think of it as, it's a little bit of an aspirational statement, but hopefully going in that direction, which is classic.com is the standard for where if you're selling a vehicle, you have to have your listing there, whether it's a listing that you're selling through an auction or you have a dealer that's doing it for you, it's under consignment, or you want to do it privately. Your listing has to be on classic.com because that is the reference point. That is the standard where people come to look for this information of what's for sale and what has sold.
Yeah, you're right. It's not immediately apparent when you first look at the site. And dealer listings you can separate dealer from private party as a user.
Correct. You can separate auction, you could separate dealer, you can separate private sellers. But when you first visit the site, it's all combined.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Every type of listing makes a market. So
Yeah.
for, in my case, 993 C4S, which is a market that I follow very closely, as you can imagine.
Of course you do.
If you go to the market for the 993 C4S on our website, you're going to see anything that dealers have for sale, anything that auctions have available right now for sale, and anything that any of those have sold or private sellers as well. And it's a representation of what the 993 market is doing today and what it has done over the last 5 years. So it gives you, in that sense, if you're in the market for one of these cars, or you're just simply discovering which market to get into, it elevates the transparency for these assets in a tremendous way, because you have a clear picture of, okay, what has sold, what's for sale, and that's why dealers and auctions should absolutely be listed on the site.
Yeah, and it looks like the response from dealers has been pretty successful. You have a lot of dealers listing with you.
Yeah. So when we first started the company, and that's just, again, five years ago, there was still some concern about disclosing their pricing, disclosing what their cars had sold for in the past, and so on. We still live in a bit of a guarded industry. Fast forward to today, and a lot of that has gone away. Most sellers are far more open and more inclined to using their data, their information, as a way to capture more customers. That has been a bit of a paradigm shift in our industry, in that everyone is far more open today than they were before about disclosing pricing and working with companies like us to give them greater exposure.
You anticipated that I was going to go here, I think, because listeners are probably sitting there thinking, well, how do I know that the pricing that classic.com displays on a given car or in a given segment of the market, for example, 993s, how do I know that's reliable data?
Great question. And it's a mixed bag in the sense that there's different types of information, but we try to display it in the most accurate way possible. So on one hand, you have auction prices, which are with auctions, generally, we know very clearly if a car sold or did not sell. So if it sold, we present the sold price. If it didn't sell, we present the highest bid in most cases. In some cases, auctions remove the high bid for whatever reason, so we can't display anything, right? In the case of dealers, we don't always know what the car sold for, but we do know what the last asking price was. So we very prominently or very clearly display the last asking price for this car was such and such. And so it's a mixed bag in that sense, in that we have to treat the different types of information that we get differently. And we try to be very nuanced about that. It's a difficult exercise. But again, if you go to a market for any one of these makes and models, you will very clearly see, okay, dealers were asking this much for this car, auctions sold cars at this price, and then private sellers have them at this price. You can start getting a lot of clarity on market pricing around makes and models.
I can even foresee another effect of kind of the power of your platform. And tell me if you think this is accurate. For a long time, you would see the same car advertised by either a private party or a dealer, advertised on multiple websites, but with different prices, right? So over here on joescars.com, it would be $19,995, and over on Craigslist, it would be $21,995 or whatever. Private parties and dealers kind of both play with the price point. I think in most cases, it's just a psychological test, right? They're fishing different price points to see what hits.
Well, there's that, which would be a very deliberate, action by the dealer or the seller. But in most cases, it's actually that they forgot.
Right. It's an old listing or yeah, exactly. Yeah.
They forgot, they updated the price in one place, but they forgot to update it in the other.
Yes.
Right? That is happening less and less because we're now starting to use, sellers are starting to use inventory management systems. Before a lot of this pricing happened manually
Right.
at each source. So we're seeing less of that. But with private sellers, we still see that because obviously the private seller doesn't have an inventory management system. So they put it on, to your point, Facebook Marketplace at one price, and they come to our site, they see that others are selling for another price, so they put it at another price. There's still some of that, unfortunately.
Yeah. I guess where I was going with that one is that maybe classic.com will help stabilize this phenomenon because as you grow and as more and more people use and trust the website, it may have a positive effect on that phenomenon, which can be frustrating if you're looking for a car and you think it's one price and they actually say, no, it's this price. So anyway, just a side note, I thought that was interesting.
And I agree with you. We are having an impact in that sense for the industry, in that there is now a place where it's sort of the central repository around pricing.
Right. Exactly.
So they come to our site, they price it, and then they use that price across other mediums, which is fine. It's great.
And then also maybe, just maybe, you're having an effect on wildly disparate pricing on the same make and model of car.
Yes.
Which we have seen all over the place. Like there's a particular dealer I see, in the US that has a kind of an elaborate website and deals in a lot of American muscle cars. And the pricing there is just bananas. Like oftentimes 2 or 3 times what the car's actual value would be, particularly when it's like been customized to within an inch of its life. And so maybe there'll be some stabilization there too.
Yes, although there are some challenges that are specific to our industry, and you know this as much as anybody. A good example is the FJ company. An FJ40 on average today, I don't know, I haven't looked at the market recently, but if we went to the market, I'm sure it would be the average car sells for anywhere between maybe the high 20s to mid 30s. That's an average car. At the FJ company, it's $250,000 to buy one of our vehicles, and that is simply because there's a massive difference in getting an average vehicle to getting a car that has been completely re-engineered. So we do have to deal with that in the data. All of our challenges, that is one of the more complex ones to solve for. But we have to give space for it in the sense that when you come to the site, you have to be able to see all of these options, cars that are average all the way to cars that are, highly, highly engineered and modern to some extent.
Well, like they say, there's a butt for every seat, right? So there's a market for the sort of plain Jane cars that maybe, they're at a low price point. But also apples to apples comparisons, you have to do that. I mean, you can't compare, a kind of a stock FJ to what you're building. Let's talk a little bit about if I'm a private party and I want to list on classic.com. Do I get a specialist from classic.com that shepherds my listing until it sells? Is that how it works?
No, so it's completely self-serve.
Okay.
You come to the site and we very easily guide you through the process of listing your vehicle. And I will say that there's a big difference between doing it well and doing it in a very mediocre fashion. If you want to sell your car on your own, great. But it is work. It's not as simple as let me put a listing up there and see what happens. You can always do that, but the results are going to be mediocre, right? If you want to sell a car yourself, you have to almost all of the same processes, the same methods that the professionals use if you want to be effective about it, right? So we give you the tools for you to create a beautiful profile, but it is up to the seller to use them, right? Getting the right pictures taken, creating a proper description, putting it into the right market. All of these things are, if you have the time to do it as a private seller, great. God bless you. Come do it on classic.com. If not, we often tell our sellers, our private sellers, that they are better off handing their car over to a professional, be it a dealer or one of the auction sites that can help them through the process of selling.
It can be a hassle and a lot of phone calls and tire kickers and people who don't show up for a PPI and all of that. And then people who want to, lowball you or talk you down or, it's selling a car is not fun. Buying a car isn't fun either. So any tools that are out there to make that easier for me, I'm all for it.
Yeah.
So where do you see the growth and future of the site? I'm really curious about that because already it's built out to be a really useful tool, but where are you going with it?
So I always go back to the three core kind of pillars of the company: discovery, pricing, and helping users sell their vehicles. We have a lot of work to do on all three. A lot of work. On the discovery front, you are right. You can find hundreds and thousands of listings on the site already. But the reality is that there's millions of cars out there that should be discoverable on the site. We still have a lot of work to do in bringing in more and more inventory. Right now, there's about 400 today, about 460 dealers on the site. That should be 4,000, right? In the next few years.
10x growth.
Absolutely, yeah. In at least 3 years, more or less, is what we have planned. Well, that immediately, from a pricing standpoint, makes the site far more interesting, but also gives us a few more challenges in that we're ingesting a lot more data and then bucketing into the right places so that the pricing gets crisper, right? You should see that happening over time. And then in parallel with all of that, making it easy to sell, making it, we talk about it internally as we have to make it stupid easy to sell a car, which automatically means that it has to be stupid easy to buy, right? Like, so it's solving both of those problems, how to sell very easily. Really what you're doing is you're solving that second problem, which is buying easily. And so you should see a lot of progress from us in those three areas in the next 3 years.
Fantastic. And how about your own automotive ambitions? I mean, FJs and Porsches are super cool, but is there anything else that you'd like to own one day, or maybe there's a car that you've got your eye on classic.com itself?
So as bizarre as it sounds, because I think professional collectors will find this laughable, but I actually like 4-seater Ferraris.
Oh yeah, why not? I mean, you've got kids, so it makes sense.
Everyone who's into Ferraris is exactly, but everyone who's into Ferraris is usually they go for the coupes and the 2-seaters.
Right.
I happen to think that the 4-seaters are undervalued.
Yes.
And I think they're going to appreciate because the next generation of collector is more inclined to enjoy our hobby with the family.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas previous generations maybe did not. Like my parents, they didn't care much about what I was doing in the weekends. It's just we as parents are now helicopter parents. So we're always doing something with our kids. And that is certainly my case. So I think there's something to do with the 4-seater Ferraris, and within my means, I've bought a few. I have a 400i, which is an awesome car.
Great car. So, love that wedge styling.
It's the to some it's the ugliest car ever, and I think it's the most gorgeous car ever.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real departure from the earlier Ferrari years,
Yeah.
But it's also a really cool moment in time. And there's a lot of cars of that era that have that same kind of space age wedge type futurism to them,
Absolutely.
Which I love. I love the 208 Dinos and 308 Dinos.
Oh, for sure.
Again, wedge Ferraris, and some people think they're plug ugly, but also, you can get one for not crazy money.
Exactly.
So
exactly. That's my bet. In general, the 4-seater Ferraris are not, the pricing is reasonable. So my goal is little by little bit, very little by little bit, very slowly, acquire every 2+2, every 4-seater Ferrari V12, starting with the 250 GT, which I don't have. I'm not there yet. I'll make my way up all the way to the GTC Lucille, GTC4 Lucille.
But now the 2+2s go back even earlier than that, right? I mean, the 212 Inter and...
You're absolutely right. You know your Ferraris extremely well. So the first series production 4-seater was the 250 GT. But prior to that, there were cars like the 212 Inter that were 4-seaters.
Yeah.
Not series production, but yeah.
Right.
And that might be a little bit out of my ballpark.
Well, yeah, but right now. But I mean, after 10x growth, let's come back in 4 years and see what's in your garage.
Let's do that.
Fantastic. Juan Diego Calle, CEO and founder of Classic.com. The website link will be in the show notes, guys. And also check out the amazing Toyota FJ builds from the FJ company. That's over at fj.co. And finally, if you're into air-cooled Porsches, check out drivestraat.com. And that's STRAAT.com. What is that? Dutch for street or road?
So my last name is Calle.
Oh, okay. It's a good play.
But yes, Dutch for street.
Very good. I've got some Dutch listeners. So Juan, thanks so much. This was really fun. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Maurice. Thanks for having me. Really, really appreciate it. It was fun.
That's all for this episode of Horsepower Heritage. If you like what you've heard, become a patron at buymeacoffee.com/HP Heritage. Don't forget to follow Horsepower Heritage on Instagram and YouTube, and tell your friends about the show. And until next time, I'm Maurice Merrick. Thanks for listening.